Hi everyone, it's Aaron here. We're just going to start the webinar in about 60 seconds. Just give a few more people just another chance to jump on. Hopefully you can all see my screen. If I get my thumbs up from my little elves. Hey, I'm just trying to share my screen in a second. I've got a slide deck here. I think I do have this. Excellent. Hopefully now you should be able to see my screen. Fantastic. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Really excited you could be here for this webinar. I'm going to keep this one to about the 30 minutes. And we're going to talk about FSLogix containers. I must have let me swap screens. How's that? My little elves were telling me I was sharing the wrong screen. Is that all good, guys? Excellent, excellent, excellent. Yes, well, as I say, welcome. My name's Aaron Parker. I'm a solution architect at Insentra, and I want to talk to you today about FSLogix containers. But first, probably just maybe to set the scene, a little bit of why we're here. If we talk about virtual desktop environments today, whether that's something like Microsoft Remote Desktop Services, Citrix XenApp XenDesktop, or VMware Horizon, typically I'm talking to customers about two things that are driving them to deliver a better product for their users, and that is security and end user experience. So today we're going to concentrate on end user experience and what we can do in terms of what FSLogix does in that arena. So to do that, I sort of want to illustrate with a little bit of an example. So I want to introduce you to Steve. Steve's a sales director at a company, and he's very much an early adopter of technology. And that includes things like fancy new gadgets, but also virtual desktop environments. So he's seen the value of delivering desktops through, in this case, happens to be XenApp, because they have a number of call centers, but they also have roaming users. They have users who use XenApp as their primary desktop. They might be knowledge workers or task workers. But it enables them to be a little bit flexible than they might have done with just physical PCs. And so they've invested a bit of time and effort into delivering this environment. Steve has fairly high expectations of end user experience. So Steve's the kind of guy who likes to get stuff done, and he wants to ensure that when he gets into his virtual desktop environment that it performs well, he can get on quickly, he gets access to his applications, and that the look and feel is exactly like it would do on a physical PC. So Steve's pretty, as I say, likes his gadgets. He uses a Surface Pro daily with Windows 10. And maybe when he goes home, he might leave this in the office and use his virtual desktop environment. But with that physical PC and Windows 10 in his office applications locally, and there might be some additional applications like Google Chrome, Microsoft Teams, I think even Slack in there as well. He knows what that user experience is like. He knows the way that those applications work. And when he gets into a virtual desktop environment, sometimes he gets a little bit frustrated in the way that experience is like. So Outlook, they've moved the company to Office 365, and Outlook doesn't necessarily perform exactly the way that it might do if he's on a physical PC. So they've run into some challenges with performance. Outlook isn't responsive. They want to be able to use applications such as OneDrive for Business, Slack, as I said, but some modern applications like Chrome, and they even have some developers who use this virtual desktop environment as well, and they use things like Microsoft Visual Studio Code and some others. These modern applications that install in the end user profile, they install in the user's context, and from an IT perspective, they are difficult to manage, but they need these applications in this environment to work. From an end user point of view, they just want to get access to their applications. They want it to be consistent, and they want it to just work, and it work every time that they log on to that system. So with that, I want to introduce you to Humbug. Humbug is Steve's IT manager and administrator. Humbug is, I guess you could say, he's a team lead for a small IT team with a fairly diverse end user population. Typical for most companies where that IT team is sort of pushed to look after a whole number of different environments, and that includes, of course, their XenApp and XenDesktop environment. So Humbug's successfully, with the backing of Steve, of course, has successfully rolled out a virtual desktop environment, but he's resorted to some workarounds to get some of these applications working. So those workarounds include enabling Outlook cache mode, but with the OST file on the network. The challenge that he's come up with that is that under load, those OST files become corrupted. Outlook just doesn't perform and as well as it should do, and potentially has some crashes. He also spends a lot of time managing these applications. In a XenApp environment, he's got a whole diverse set of applications that he has to deliver in that environment. And he and his team spend probably a little bit too much time on the profile management solution, just trying to get those applications to work. That's a lot of time spent fiddling around with the configuration and working out what he needs to include and not include in the profile, because he doesn't want to roam too much of the profile, but he also wants to ensure that when the user logs on, that they get a look and feel of a persistent desktop in a non-persistent virtual desktop environment, which is exactly what XenApp and XenDesktop is. Humbug also needs to ensure that his users get consistent logon times. He's been able to get a pretty good logon speed for these users, but it's not always consistent. Sometimes it's well, most of the time it's actually pretty good at around a little under 30 seconds, but here and there it's way above that, and he sees a lot of load on his file servers. The other piece he'd like to be able to do is just go that last mile and deliver some additional user experiences. So Outlook, for example, users spend so much time, 80% of the time perhaps, in Outlook, and they want features such as instant search. They want to be able to use OneDrive for Business. They want to be able to log on and use applications like OneNote, for example, starting up Skype for Business, and so on. It takes a long time to look and get into the address book, and occasionally they get issues with the Office 365 Pro Plus applications needing to be reactivated. So he has a pretty challenging environment. He's got a lot of backing from Steve, but Steve is potentially pushing Humbug to ensure that things just work. So Humbug and Steve have a great relationship on a personal level, but Steve is always pushing Humbug to go just that little bit further to ensure that they're getting the most out of their virtual desktop environment, to ensure that they've protected their investment in that environment, because it's the primary desktop for a significant number of users in their environment, but also it needs to ensure that it works 24/7 as well. Humbug doesn't necessarily want to be the guy having to pick up the phone at 9 o'clock in the evening because Steve can't get into his virtual desktop. Key in both Humbug and Steve's mind is that user experience is key. They want to ensure that users get onto that desktop and it delivers the user experience that the user expects. So to do that, of course, Humbug is doing a bit of research and he's come across FSLogix. Now, I guess at this point I need to explain exactly what FSLogix provides. So today I'm talking about FSLogix containers, but FSLogix does a little bit more than that. A little bit of background to FSLogix is that primarily their products, I guess, have been born out of the virtual desktop environment. There are particular challenges that we've all faced in delivering XenApp and XenDesktop or Microsoft RDS or VMware Horizon environments. And there might be challenges around delivering different sets of applications in those virtual desktops environments. It might be the types of applications we have in that image, the number of images that we have. It might be Office 365 applications. It might be user profiles and so on. So it's, and when we talk about user experience, that's user experience not only from the end user perspective, but it's also from the administrator experience as well. We want the end user to have a great user experience. We want the administrator to be able to deliver solutions to these challenges in a simple manner. So FSLogix has, I guess, primarily 4 components: profile containers and Office 365 containers that we're going to talk about today. They also have app masking and Java version control, and I'm going to talk about these 2 products in an upcoming webinar next month. So make sure you tune in for a little bit more detail around those, which will include some demos as well, which should be pretty cool. So Humbug's done his research in the FSLogix containers, and he's understood the architecture. Now, I think the great thing about the FSLogix approach to their architecture is the simplicity. When I talk about the administrator end user experience, we want to be able to, as administrator, we want to be able to deliver solutions that are not necessarily complex. I don't want to have to go and deploy, just manage user profiles and applications. I've already gone and deployed XenApp and XenDesktop. I don't necessarily want to go and have to deploy an extra set of complex architecture over and above that with a third-party component. So FSLogix has done a lot of great work with the FSLogix apps suite in delivering a very simple architecture. And for all of those 4 products, and including the containers components that I'm talking about today, there's only 3, well, the minimum, I guess, of 3 components that we need to deploy. One is the FSLogix agent. So the agent actually enables all of the features that FSLogix provides, including profile container and Office 365 container. The FSLogix agent goes into the image. So that image might be Windows 7 or 2008 R2, or if you are deploying Windows Server 2016 or Windows 10 today, it's exactly the same image. That image goes, the agent goes into the image, and that image then could be deployed in multiple ways. It could be a static virtual machine. It could be a physical PC. That virtual machine could be on top of Xen Server, Hyper-V, vSphere. We could be deploying environments on Azure or AWS. But in this case, the FSLogix agent, because it's in the image, it's independent of how we're delivering that image, and it's also independent of the underlying architecture underneath or the underlying hypervisor. So what we do in an on-prem environment on top of vSphere, we're going to take exactly the same approach in the same types of workloads that we're going to deploy in Microsoft Azure. Configuration is done through group policy. So for profile container and Office 365 container, I'll create a group policy object and apply that to my computer OU, and that configuration then will then apply to any machine that I'm pushing that agent out towards. And for containers, I'm then going to point my containers at a file share somewhere. So what we're doing with profile containers and Office 365 containers, we are, I guess, providing a local profile experience. So the same experience that a user gets on a physical PC, but we are encapsulating that profile in a virtual disk, and we are roaming that between the sessions. So when a user logs onto a machine, they have a virtual disk that's attached to their session. That virtual disk contains their profile, or it contains only their Office 365 cache components, and those containers sit on a file share somewhere. And the benefit of this approach is that when compared to traditional profile management solutions or workarounds where we might stick the OST file on the network, applications aren't necessarily built to run in that sort of configuration. And when we think about profiles and logon times and application launch times, we are opening files, opening a lot of reads to a network file location, reading that file and writing it locally, and then log off or write back. We open the file again, we write the data back, and we close that file again. Instead of doing that, we open a single connection to a virtual disk that's sitting in an SMB file share somewhere, and those reads and writes happen inside that connection. And the FSLogix agent then does its magic underneath, does some optimizations. We can handle gracefully disconnects, for example, and reduce the amount of IO that hits the file share. So from a profile container perspective, profile container encapsulates the entire user profile, and we roam that between sessions. When the user connects to a desktop, their virtual disk is attached to that session, and their profile is available there instantly. In that profile, we could store a number of things. Consider applications such as Office 365, pretty straightforward, but things like Google Chrome, Microsoft Teams, Slack, a lot of these new style applications are writing a lot of data to the local component of the user profile. And we think about traditional profile management solutions as we're migrating, especially to Windows 10 and Windows Server 2016. We're seeing more and more of these applications being deployed in these environments. And we're also having to take or be able to support things like the new start menu in Windows 10 and Windows Server 2016. Maybe you're looking to want to support universal applications on top of Windows 10. These sorts of things all change the way that these applications have interacted with the user profile. And what I'm seeing more and more of is that to get these applications roaming, to simplify the user experience, the end user experience as well as the administrator experience, and spend less time on architecting and operating these solutions. I just want to pick up the profile and move it around. Now, for those organizations that are perhaps happy with their profile management solution, this is where the Office 365 container piece slots in very well. I can, for example, I could work with Citrix Profile Management and add the Office 365 container solution or component to roam only specifically these Office 365 applications. So I might want to turn on Outlook Cache Mode and enable Windows Search Index and roam that between sessions. I might want to enable a native user experience for OneDrive for Business. Skype for Business is an interesting use case. Even in small organizations, the address book is quite large. When Skype for Business starts, it downloads the address book and stores it locally. I want to roam that cache and ensure that Skype for Business starts quickly. If I'm rolling out OneNote again caches locally. OneNote documents are stored in the user profile. I want to be able to roam those quickly so that when I'm working in a non-persistent environment like XenApp and XenDesktop and other solutions like that, I want to be able to get the user on quickly. I want those applications to work, and I don't have to wait for them to rebuild caches every time. And I want to be able to do it in such a way that it's simple to manage. So pretty flexible, pretty simple architecture, flexible. That end user experience when I'm logging onto XenApp or XenDesktop desktop, or as it is in Humbug's case, or maybe it's RDS by itself, pure RDS. I'm seeing surprisingly a lot of interest in that, and I'm actually expecting to see more and more interest in pure RDS when Microsoft releases the new version of RDS around September timeframe, and also VMware Horizon environments, because the FSLogix approach is independent of both the hypervisor and the broker. I'm going to deliver that native user experience that they expect on a physical PC. So from a administration point of view, as I said, configuration is done through group policy. I'm going to create a group policy object and assign it to my computer OU. And I can do a few things. I can enable all the features that I want to roam. The other approaches I can take too is with Profile Container and Office 365 Container, I can support multiple concurrent sessions. So I might be doing, for example, having users log on to a published desktop and then getting published applications inside that desktop, or I have application silos where the user is launching applications from different silos. I want the user to get that same experience between those silos or different sessions, and I want to be able to do it in such a way that I can support concurrent sessions. So we can do that with profile containers. In Windows 7 and 2008 R2, these operating systems support the VHD format. So when I roll out for Windows 7 and 2008 R2, I'm going to store a VHD in a file share somewhere. For Windows 8 and 2012 and above, we can use VHDX. VHDX performs a little bit faster than the older VHD format. Additionally, what I can do then if I'm running, as I move to Windows 10 and Windows Server 2016 on the back end, while that back end could be Windows Server natively, it can also be provided by the native storage platform. So let's say, for example, I'm deploying on Nutanix. I can use Nutanix file services to present an SMB location. What I'm doing there is I'm aligning my much like I would do if I was deploy Hyper-V with scale-out file services. I'm going to deploy on the back end a version of Windows that supports what's on the front end. So if I'm deploying Windows 10 or Windows Server 2016 on the front end, I wanted to support Windows Server 2016 on the back end as well. Now, so configuration there, pretty straightforward. And then so once I've rolled out the agent, I might roll this out via something like Citrix PVS, Citrix MCS. I might be rolling these out through instant clones on VMware Horizon, for example, or static VMs. I assign my GPO, users log on, and I get a container. So in this case, as you can see in the example, I have a container for my profile, and I have a container for my Office 365 components. That's the ODFC container that's listed there. So what I have is the ability to separate these components out. And I sort of like this approach because the profile is going to be pretty important to end users. If they need to recreate their profile, it can be a little bit of an imposition because I need to perhaps go and set up my preferences again. So splitting these out gives me chance for, I guess, to do a couple of things. One, and from an operational point of view, I can protect the profile. Maybe I want to pick up the profile and replicate it to a secondary data center, or I can put the profile on primary storage and I can put my Office 365 container where they are just caches that can be recreated on secondary slower storage. And if for whatever reason I need to recreate the Office 365 container, it's not such a big deal because it is just a cache. I can recache that data and away I go. This approach is also good for migrations. I've spoken to a number of customers over the past 12 months that are migrating to Office 365. And what we can do there is we can deploy Office 365 container or profile container in their existing environment. We can enable Outlook cache mode before they do their migration, and we can migrate the data then migrate their mailboxes up to Office 365, and we're not then having to recache their mailboxes locally. So from an end user perspective, their mailbox is migrated and they know no different. Outlook continues to work exactly like it did yesterday or the day before my migration happened. So I think the other big key takeaway here, though, is that what we're doing with these approaches is that we're not making any changes to the applications themselves. So if you consider the way something like Outlook works when it writes to its OST file, while I can put an OST file up on the network, and I think even Microsoft even has a knowledge base article that supports this configuration, in practice, this doesn't actually work for a number of reasons. We get corrupted OST files, and the reason this happens is because we have intermittent issues in the network. Outlook expects to be able to write directly to the OST file and those writes to succeed. And if they don't succeed, we get a corrupted OST file. What we're doing here is as far as the application is concerned, the application continues to write to what it sees as a C drive. We're not redirecting the actual application writes across the network. They're being encapsulated inside that virtual disk. So from an application point of view, it installs, operates, updates, and works exactly like it would do on a physical PC, except underneath we're actually be able to redirect this I/O to the network and into a virtual disk, and we can attach that to the user session wherever they are logging on. In some cases, I can move these between operating systems as well. And then from an administrator perspective, I'm delivering the simplicity that I need from an operational point of view so that I'm not spending time troubleshooting, tweaking, playing around with profile management solutions. I can deploy very quickly and be up and running. So Humbug's done his research. He's done an evaluation. An evaluation we can provide with a 30-day fully featured evaluation, so you can get this up and running. Humbug has deployed out to his users, and of course, Steve's happy and high fives all around. Both from I guess, from a business point of view, but an IT point of view, Humbug's been able to deploy a solution in a consistent manner, low complexity, and keep his users happy. And of course, from Steve's point of view, he now has the same user experience he gets in his virtual desktop environments as he expects on his physical PC. So when he moves between his Surface Pro and his Windows 10 device, now he logs into a XenApp environment. The look and feel is exactly the same. He can even do things like install Microsoft Teams or Slack or other applications like that, and make sure that application is available next time that he logs on. Now, one of the I think the most interesting use cases that the most interesting case studies that we have is one of our customers here locally, which has done really well. So they Challenger is a financial services company, and they deployed the FSLogix app suite into a XenApp environment. Now, they're using XenApp. I think at the time it was 7.6. They're likely on the latest version of XenApp, but they're rolling out XenApp with Windows Server 2016. They're integrating Citrix app layering, and they're using profile container and app masking. I'll talk about app masking in more detail in the next webinar, but they're able to use app masking along with Citrix app layering to simplify what they're doing with app layering. Plus also use app masking from a licensing point of view. And they were able to roll out profile container quite successfully, along with app masking and Citrix app layering. And the really interesting piece was they were able to remove the need for Microsoft App V, which is very cool. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in the next webinar. Now, the other feature I wanted to touch on very briefly, because I want to talk about this too in another webinar in a couple of months. FSLogix is working on, I guess, the next big feature for FSLogix containers. So this is profile container and Office 365 container. So I touched on using profile container and Office 365 container on top of vSphere or Hyper-V or XenServer or whatever it is. And we're talking to more and more customers who are looking at moving XenApp or RDS workloads or whatever it is into public cloud environments. So that might be Azure AWS. To do that, to get the most benefit out of moving to those public cloud environments, is changing the way that they approach their deployment. So instead of deploying file servers, I want to be able to use, on Microsoft Azure, for example, I want to be able to use Azure native storage. So I would need to be able to support attaching a container directly onto Azure native storage, which is going to be much cheaper and much more efficient to operate than running up a Windows Server virtual machine on top of Azure as well. Now, Cloud Cache, I'll go into this in more detail later on, but Cloud Cache is a feature in preview that's going to be able to do a number of things. One, it's going to be able to enable a cache locally where the agent is actually running, and then replicate containers into multiple locations. So we can do this for DR, or we can do this for moving a user session from an on-prem data center into a public cloud, or in active-active scenarios where a user may connect to multiple data centers. I might do this for backup. If I'm a customer who's moved into a hosted desktop environment, now my user data, I guess, is encapsulated in that service provider's environment. How do I get that how do I get that user data out of there? Or how do I make my user environment, which is my profile, my user data, whatever it is, portable between environments? How do I enable disaster recovery? And I can do this with Cloud Cache. So Cloud Cache will do a few things. Enables native replication within the FSLogix agent, and it will also enable native cloud storage, which will be key for reducing costs in moving a lot of these workloads into public cloud environments such as Azure and AWS. So with that, I just wanted to wrap up with a short, sharp webinar just on profile containers and Office 365 containers. Of course, now we have Humbug's hero within his environment. If you want to provide or want to see more information on Profile Container and Office 365 Container, just go to insentra.com.au/Aaron Parker FSLogix. We can provide two things, an evaluation, or if you are a partner looking to deploy these, either if you are hosting environments for customers or you're managing environments for your customers, we can get you up and running with additional technical information and a lot more detailed information around how these products work. So for the next webinar, which I'm doing next month, I'm going to talk about the app masking and the Java version control components. So I've talked a bit here about the profile container pieces and how that assists in the end user experience. This is more, I think, the app masking and the Java version control around two key pieces. What does it mean for administrators in simplifying management of applications in virtual desktop environments? And what does that also mean, I guess, for licensing, but also even a security perspective as well? So if you want to sign up for the next webinar, please go to the link below. And I want to thank you very much for attending. Now, what I didn't say right at the beginning is if you had any questions, please do ask them. I'll open up for questions now, and we can just have, yeah, we've got a few questions. Fantastic. So first question here is FSLogix got anything to do to get help getting around the limitations of Outlook in cache mode regarding high number of folders in a shared mailbox, stopping the flow of mailbox to the primary mailbox? Okay, yes, this is an excellent question, and I think I touched on this a little bit in talking about how FSLogix does not change the behavior of the application. And I think this is a really important point, is that if I want the application to work in a virtual desktop environment exactly the same way it works on a physical desktop environment, if I'm going to implement a solution such as FSLogix, I do not want it to actually modify the behavior of the application. That's probably got advantages and disadvantages, right? The advantage is that the application, I have some consistency around that application work. So no, FSLogix will not change the behavior of the applications. If you understand how Outlook works in cache mode today, that's exactly how Outlook will work in cache mode with FSLogix Profile Container or Office 365 Container. So we have, if you have considerations around storage, for example, or performance, because you have large mailboxes, we have customers who live in Outlook, you're still going to have to use solutions such as archiving and so on. So when it comes to enabling cache mode, I would highly recommend that you only enable around 3 months worth of the cache. But I think the key takeaway there is that FSLogix does not change the behavior of the application, and I think that's a good thing because it keeps the simplicity. What's the maximum network latency required for the VHDX mount? So if my FSLogix agent is on a XenApp Zen desktop environment or a virtual desktop environment, what's the latency between where the agent is and where I'm storing? So the FSLogix agent does a number of things under the hood, and I'll put on the umbrella of secret source that assists in handling disconnects and so on. But because these are just VHDXs that are sitting on SMB shares somewhere, it's going to be exactly the same approach that you might take to deploying Hyper-V on scale-out file server. It is still just a VHDX. Now, I know I have seen some testing that the FSLogix guys have done mounting like a Windows server on-prem mounting. I think it was like AWS S3 storage. So you know that latency is going to be fairly high, but it's not something I'm really going to give you a number on. So what I would say is that storage should be as local as possible to where the virtual desktop workloads are running. Having said that, this is what the Cloud Cache feature will assist in the future. So Cloud Cache will enable a local cache with replication to storage in other locations, and I'll cover that in more detail in a webinar in a couple of months. Usual question, is the webinar recorded? I hope I hit the record button. I will give you a I think we'll send out an email at the end of this with some details, which should include the recording. So fingers and toes crossed that I actually hit the record button. And a question on licensing. So would love to see you guys come up with a solution so that we don't have to manually map large shared mailboxes. Yeah, so the FSLogix agent does do one thing where when the user connects and Outlook needs to go into cache mode, the FSLogix can do that. The FSLogix agent can do that on behalf of the user. So the benefit of this is that I don't have to actually enforce cache mode. I might set a certain amount of mailbox that goes that I might store offline. But if for whatever reason my container is not attached, I want Outlook in online mode. I don't want the user to see an error message if it cannot find the OST file. So let's say I have an intermittent problem with my file server, my container is not attached, the FSLogix agent is smart enough to put Outlook in online mode. When the container is attached to my next session, now I can go into cache mode. But going back to the first question on the behavior of Outlook and so on, yeah, in my mind today, I don't like the idea of injecting anything into Outlook to change the behavior. And that goes for Outlook and it goes for other applications as well. I don't want to change the behavior of application. If I pick up the phone for the application vendor, I want to be able to, if I need to open up a support call, I don't want to have to go through a whole rigmarole around, we've done X, Y, and Z. I want to say, I've enabled cache mode, Outlook should work just like this. What can we do about it? So that's my view on that. Is yes, we have a number of users who map large mailboxes and multiple mailboxes, and this is exactly the way that Outlook works. I want that to work the same way as it does in a physical PNC in a virtual desktop environment. Potentially, that's something that Microsoft needs to address. Oh wow, a lot of questions here, and I think I'm really running out of time. I'm going to, hey, my little elves on the line, have I got time to go through more questions? Yes, excellent. All right. So how many, when the user is accessing the same container from multiple devices, such as from laptops and tablets? Okay, so concurrency. I touched on this a little bit. With profile container, yes, we can most definitely support concurrency. So the profile container supports, I can log on to my first session, and then I get what's essentially a differencing disk on my second session, and then I can do two things with that differencing disk. I can basically set that to read only. So when that second session logs off, just discard the differencing disk. Or when my sessions log off, if I have multiple sessions and I've got multiple differencing disks, I want to merge those differencing disks back in with my profile container. I'm probably always going to come into a last write win scenario, but I can merge those changes back into my primary container, and so therefore I can support multiple concurrent sessions. Laptops and tablets is potentially probably a different scenario, right? Now I'm mixing virtual desktop environment with physical desktop environments. Today in June 2018, if we consider that, say, Windows Server 2016 in the back end and a completely different version of Windows 10 current branch on the physical PC, I'm already have a difference in profiles. And do I want exactly the same profile between what is effectively two different versions of Windows? And maybe not. I definitely want the same data between those, so I might want to ensure that something like OneDrive for Business, what I see inside my XenApp virtual desktop or Zen desktop is exactly what I see in my physical desktop. What's the link to arrange a demo? So let me go back a slide here, and the link is right there, insentra.com.au/Aaron Parker FSLogix. Can we change the original size allocated to the user? E.g., we started at 50 gig and it needs to be increased to, say, 80 gig. Yeah, this is a definitely important configuration. So if I think about this this primarily comes up for Office 365 containers. The containers have a they are a dynamic disk. Essentially, they'll start at a minimum size and they'll grow to a specific size. For deployment design and deployment, we need to go through an exercise of understanding how much data we need to cache, for example, whether that's in the user profile or whether that is in something like the mailbox. Outlook is an interesting one where some customers are happy to cache 1 month, 3 months, 6 months. But if we think of customers such as lawyers, solicitors, I think even health might come to mind, is often these customers live in Outlook. And of course, it's very difficult to change user behavior. Outlook is their file system. And if I move to Office 365, I get 500 gig, even up to 100 gig mailboxes. So I need to think about the storage and capacity I need to cache a lot of these things. Ideally, you would go through a sizing exercise to understand how much you want to cache and size the containers appropriately. If you haven't done that, you can go through a sizing exercise for the containers. There is the FRX command line utility, and I think this would actually make a really great blog post. So what I will do is I put that on my list to put some more technical detail than I have time for on the line in a blog post, which might make more sense. What then the main benefits you are providing versus symbolic links, etc.? Yes, great question. So FSLogix, the approach of using virtual disks to encapsulate a profile or Outlook cache files is not necessarily new. Microsoft has been doing this with UPD for a long time. I think FSLogix was first to do this with an Office 365 approach, Outlook cache mode, encapsulating OST files. And traditionally, that has been done just with a symbolic link. So I take the profile or the location inside the profile, and it's just a symbolic link that goes into a virtual disk that's attached to the session that users logged on as. FSLogix has done a lot of work, and they actually have a proprietary method that doesn't actually use symbolic links, because a number of applications will trip up over symbolic links and just not work with symbolic links. So this is one of the great benefits with what the FSLogix team has done, is that they have a different approach that is far more seamless to the applications and definitely works in a much more consistent manner. Will a virtual disk be downloaded to the client machine when the user logs on? So the question here is around VHDX file size. When the user logs onto their session, what happens to the virtual disk? The virtual disk, whether it's a VHD or VHDX, it stays on the network share. That virtual disk is not copied across the network. When the user logs onto their session, that virtual disk is attached to the VM or the machine that they are logging onto. So we have one connection that goes from the client to the file server, and then inside that session, inside the virtual disk, we have all the file reads and writes. So from outside perspective, we have one SMB connection which opens up, the file stays on the file server. Inside the session, the applications see a local disk, reads and writes go to that local disk just like they would expect. So from a profile point of view, I log on, my profile is available. From an application point of view, my application starts up, reads and writes, look like they're happening on a virtual disk. And going back to the symbolic link question just previously, this is done with the FSLogix secret source underneath to ensure that that's done in a consistent manner. Yeah, so Stephen here is asking a couple of questions around, just going back to the question around the way Outlook works with shared folders and more than 500 folders. There is a knowledge base article from Microsoft recently around Outlook performance and the number of folders or items in the mailbox. And the short version of that knowledge base article that says if you have more than X number of whatever that number is, I think it might be around 500, then reduce the amount of items that you have in that. So hopefully Microsoft is addressing that as they improve Outlook. Yes, we have, I do see this a lot. Lots of users with very large mailboxes. Outlook is their file system. They have a lot of items inside the mailbox. Archiving is potentially one way to reduce the number of items in that mailbox. So I think that's the end of the questions. Any more questions? Any coming in? Just a quick note from us. My elves, have you seen any other questions? They're madly typing away. They do look good in their elf costumes, I must say. All right. Well, that's all the questions. I want to thank you very much for attending the webinar and staying on through the Q&A at the end of it. As I say, there's the URL, insentra.com.au/Aaron Parker FSLogix for more information on evaluations and so on. Next month, I will have a webinar on app masking and Java version control and how that will assist with managing applications and virtual desktop images. And with that, I want to thank you very much for attending. Thank you for your time.